Tom, if you were OBE at the Welcome Center, looking at a clock, right, you know, it's all messed up, and then your body was to die, so you switched from OBE, looking at a clock in NPMR, you switched to being resident in NPMR, would the characters resolve themselves?
You're looking at a clock?
You're looking at a clock, OBE, so it's messed up.
Yeah, okay, so I'm out of body here and I'm looking at a clock on the wall.
Yeah, and NPMR.
Well, if I'm out of body, then I'm in the non-physical, right?
Yeah, that's what I meant. You're at the Welcome Center, let's say.
Yeah, okay.
You're looking at a clock, you're OBE, and the characters are messed up, right?
Characters of the clock.
Yeah.
Would
You
they
can't
be
see
messed up
clocks
if you were
when
looking
you're
at
OBE.
them?
No. Well, for one, there are no clocks. Okay.
You're looking at a table, there's no clock.
Yeah, there is no clock, really.
And then you die. I'm trying to get at this, first off, the thing, do you not see clocks because of the time difference and the program can't translate time? And that for people that are resident in NPMR, do they have clocks?
I'm sure they don't have clocks.
I have never seen a clock.
It's a physical matter of reality.
Yeah, I've never seen clocks. There's not much of an awareness of time. Now, there must be some because they have actions that they do and actions for a reason, expecting something to happen later. So that would indicate time. But I've never seen anything I'd call a clock or anything like that in the non-physical. I mean, people just get along and do whatever they do. But they do have plans and they do things that they anticipate. So there is a sense of a time.
Was your scenario, Randy, going OB, meditating, say, just somehow going OB, and then while you were doing that, physically dying?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was just an experiment to test the idea.
Sure.
Again, but I guess I'm trying now. I'm just raising a bigger question because there's capital delta T's, right, and
Yeah.
small case delta T's
Right.
in NPMR, and I'm saying, oh, why would they have clocks? You've got small case delta T's clicking by. Why wouldn't they have time like us?
I don't know, in that reality, there's not so much, again, let's say that we're all in our separate rooms just with headphones on. Time becomes kind of irrelevant. You're just getting and sharing data. And you get some data in and you share some data back and you're communicating and it's like you're never late for an appointment. There's nothing, it's not structured the same as it is here. Here you have things to do, babies to kiss, people to see, things to do. We run with time's important because there's so much structure here. But where it's completely unstructured, there's not a lot of that sense of I'm late, or something should happen. We're just there, there's data, it comes, you deal with it. It's not like you don't sleep, you don't get up, you're not on any kind of a cycle. There's time, you're not on a planet that goes around the sun and day and night. You don't have any of that kind of time sense going on, other than the fact that you can do things now or later, so that's a sense of time. So there is a sense of time there in that sense, but not in the sense that there's clocks on the wall or, day or night's a difference, because none of that there's no cycle. We're very cycle-based here, with sun cycles and moon cycles.
You don't anticipate a change in your perception between being OBE there and after your physical body dies?
No, the perception stays the same. But then, like I say, if you're a character in a movie, you seem to move naturally no matter how fast it goes by. Now, if you're looking at the movie from outside the film, you see the characters all speed up or you see them slow down, but you're actually in the film itself. It doesn't make any difference to you how fast the time goes by. You basically move this much every frame. Whether that frame goes by at 100 frames a second or 10 frames a second, every time a frame goes by, you move this much. It's only to the outsider looking in that they see you going slow or fast if it's 100 frames or 10 frames per second. It's not like if you're an insider, you don't say, oh man, they're really wearing me out because these frames are going by so quick. It's just one frame, one increment of motion. So that's kind of the way it is there. So you don't get any sense, between like, wow, time sped up. No, I died, All suddenly time changed. Doesn't seem to be any time changes that you're aware of. And in the non-physical, time is almost, it's existent in that there's expectation, but it's not a major player. It's kind of a before and after thing. There is a before and after. So events can happen, but they're not really time focused.
So in the transition, then, if they can synthesize all these events, don't they, instead of being in a room with headphones, wouldn't they synthesize and form
Yes.
things?
Yeah, well, what they do is the first being they see is probably a being of light in a white robe, right? Because that seems like that seems friendly. But that's because that's their interpretation, and it's the data they're being given, and then they interpret it that way because that's a soothing kind of vision. So yes, they are seeing things. It's not like they're, in a room by themselves with nothing yet, because they're still very physical in their interpretations of everything. That tends to wear off with time. The further away they get from the physical, the less they are interpreting things physical. The more it becomes data. So that's them though.
They lose the capacity to entertain themselves with forming things?
Yeah, basically.
You can't have a cup of coffee with
Yeah.
somebody in a cafe in Italy?
Yeah, you can do that for a while, but it gets boring and you forget about it soon. It's not something you keep up. You can make those kinds of interpretations, and yes, you can go lounge in a park and talk to your friends and do that sort of thing, but that gets to be boring. Because pretty soon you realize that you're making it, you're creating it.
So the boredom is the driver.
Oh.
Yeah, in that sense it is. You realize that you're the one making it. Oh, I want to sit in a cafe with some friends. There you are in your cafe, and they're the friends. You're making it all. You're making the coffee, you're making the table, the cafe, the friends, everything.
It's a lot of work.
And pretty soon it's like, well, what am I really doing here? I'm talking to myself, right? And eventually it's, let's let that go. Let's get on with something that's more real.
That can't be a shared experience? With other
It can be,
drivers?
but the shared experience, again, is more like you're just passing data. You're interpreting. You can maybe get a shared experience. It's harder to do because you'd have to have some other entity that you're sharing experience with, and then the two of you could do that. Somebody on the other line with a headphone and a mic, you could say, well, let's go to the cafe and have some coffee. Now, if they were an entity that could interpret cafe and coffee, well, there you'd be. You could both enter the same connection, like enter the same reality there, and you could do that. But if they say cafe, coffee, what's that?
So it's like your rainy day at home, and you rented 20 movies, and you start in the morning, you're watch this movie, that movie, that movie. Eventually say, oh, watching movies is boring, I'm gonna go out and do something.
Right.
Is that like
Something like that,
just
yeah.
doing this bullshit, I need to go and do another PMR. And
Yeah.
it's like a real
Yes.
relative.
So mostly when they say, are you ready for another one? They go, no way, that one was awful, That goes away pretty quickly. That dissipates very quickly, and pretty soon it's like, yeah, I'm bored, right. Been watching movies all day, and, I want to do something else. So typically particularly the recycling doesn't take that long. Because once you forget the dream of the last one, you forget coffee and you forget cafes. You really forget all that stuff, and you become more or less of that consciousness, interacting with that consciousness, and you interpret. And it starts kind of groupy to begin with, the kind of group therapy to begin with, but then it gets more and more singular. And then pretty soon it's you and other consciousness communicating. And it's not a thing like you go, you gather a bunch of friends and go down and sit down and have coffee. That really doesn't.
That's what PMR is for?
That's what PMR is for. Yeah.
So when you feel like or when you are with other consciousnesses, is that when you're talking about being in a room with a microphone and headphones and you're hearing them and they're hearing you, but it's just kind of all the same kind of thing?
It's all it's all just data and interpretations, and it depends, on. You may think, let's go to a cafe and have coffee, and the other person says, sure, I'd like a beer, because they interpret your message differently. Or you want to ride horses, it depends on how they interpret what you get. And if somebody comes out of your culture, then it's easier. They don't come out of your culture, it's harder. They don't even come out of your reality system, it's harder yet.
So I'm not hanging around with my relatives or
No, you're not hanging around with your
or
relatives and
stuck with
friends.
them.
No, neither one. You're kind of on your own. You're an individual. We're all just individual units of consciousness, and we are individual. These relationships and things that we generate here are here. They're just in this reality, and that goes away. It's like the relationships you have with people in your dreams. You know, you have people in your dreams that you love or that you run from or whatever, and you have maybe have strong relationships with them in the dream. But after the dream, it just kind of goes away, and for the next day, you can hardly even remember it. Well, it's sort of like that, and then you're an individual. So primarily, we are individuals.
There's not soul groups to put it, I mean, there's not, there is, I believe, consciousnesses that come to experience being together again.
Yeah, that interact. There are some
No,
that can.
they're planning
Yeah, they can plan and interact and come together and incarnate
groups.
into groups. That can happen. That there are connections like that. It's not.
I don't know.
It's less common. You know, it's not. It's probably the 10% or the 5%. It's not a majority kind of thing.
No.
But it can happen, and that's
that
just
more
because these
lower level?
particular individuals have strong
Connections.
to each other. And when they're planning something, that's part of their intent. And if all of them have the same kind of intent, then it's not that hard that they all end up in a situation together.
But what's the platform though? Like, what's the technology that's used? I mean, is there like a big jumbotron on
It's
the
a-
wall in MPMR and they're looking and they're like, all right, I'm gonna do this? I mean, what's the technology that they use? Like consciousness would say, all right, we're gonna do this. I need to work on this. You need to work on that. You need to work on this. Let's all go in together. And then they all kind of.
Okay.
I mean, is there a technology or? A
Yeah,
platform
basically,
you
well, the
use?
technology, of course, it's just data, but here's the way it might be. It's just kind of common. So you get to the point where you're bored and you want to do something more meaningful. So an entity will come to you, and by an entity means you get some data and you imagine a body to fit the data. Okay, so this entity is wiser, knows more than you do, seems to know what's going on, kind of like an official. So you dress them up and see them that way, and they say, well, let's what would you like to do next? What's you got any plans and things that you particularly want to do? And you say, nah, I was just about perfect in that last one. I don't know that I need anything else. And at that point they say, well, okay, let's review that. Let's look at that and see if that was the case. And then basically you get the stream of data that's your life. And it basically you're seeing it like you're watching yourself, you're watching your life in a movie. And then you'll kind of zoom in on this thing, and there you are, and you're madder than hell, and you kick the cat, and you smack your children, and you stomp out of the house, and you go, oh yeah, I guess I did have that one little problem, just that one isolated problem. And then you show another one that you did it the next day, and then they said, so basically by the time they're done, and again, you're just getting data, but you get the data, you know it's you're seeing yourself interact, you remember the things that happened, and basically you can go, oh, well, okay, maybe I need to work on something here. Maybe I'm not as perfect as I thought. And you come up with a plan, and most of it's done for you. And you say, well, yeah, I'd like to do that. And they said, okay, you ready to go? And you go, yep. And next thing you know, you're crying, someplace, somebody's smacking you around, getting you to fill your air with lungs. Your air with lungs. Your lungs with air, and you're starting all over again.
Director, ED, and he just pushes the switch and you're gone. That's it.
Something like that. Well, typically, if it's a very special situation you need, you may have to wait a while until the probability of that situation occurring is higher. And it may be with that, that couple in New York or something that, what might give you that, and she's pregnant, and that's your assignment, so you go there. So it's that kind of things, but it just happens. Sometimes the more picky you get, the more you have to wait till you get a situation that's just right. Or if you're, again, angling for friends or some other place, you have to wait. Then you may have to wait until, if you're angling for a particular entity to be your mother, you may have to wait till she gets pregnant before you go. And if she doesn't get pregnant, she gets run over by a truck instead, then you have to go to plan B. You do something else. So sometimes there's a wait, and we'll call you when the situation comes up. But for most people, it's not that picky. You're going to learn in almost anything. So you come and you go, and you come and you go again. And you're not that. You don't plan that much. The planning, the people who do a lot of extensive planning are rare. A lot of people do just a little bit of planning and a little bit of review, but mostly not a lot's done.
So these people that like Brian Weiss and some of these that do all these like past life regressions and they talk about how these entities were always together, they're brothers, they're sisters, they'd be killed, and then he was the neighbor, and that they seem to have been together countless and countless of times. They're always interacting with each other. Is that purposeful, or are they just, is he just fantasy? I mean,
Some of both. Some of both. Sometimes it's purposeful, and sometimes it just makes people feel better. They're among friends.
I had a feeling that it might have been a little fluff in there, that
Yeah.
they're just kind of over-exaggerating a lot
Yeah.
of these things.
When you say that when you make the transition, you kind of forget everything, you remember a little bit of the sense of, so that you can plan for the next go-around, right?
Well, you forget it. It's like, it's funny. It's like a dream, and it kind of goes away. But then when you get to the point where they're showing you your life and things you need to learn, it's all perfectly crystal clear. You see it. It's like watching a movie, though. It's not like being there, and it's not like you're emotionally attached to it. So it's not like you're reliving it. It's like you're detached, watching it, as a movie.
So you don't have
Yeah.
feelings?
Are you not
You don't have
embarrassed by
feelings?
No, you don't have a lot of, you don't look at something that makes you mad or anything. You can see yourself being mad, but no, you're not attached to it. You're detached from it altogether. You're like a detached observer looking at it. So
So you know that's you, but it's not you, like you feel.
right, it's not the you that's here watching.
It's not the ego you.
No, it's not the ego you. You're just seeing it. And the reason that they do that is because almost everyone feels that they're a whole lot further ahead and almost perfect. And they have, in order to kind of recalibrate them to say, no, you're going to need to focus on this now and make a definite intent that you're going to learn this because you had this problem. And it's to get that intent. So sometimes, again, I'm saying the planning is not the big thing. It's more of the minority thing. Sometimes people will come in and you'll notice they're very focused on a certain kind of thing. They're very intent on things. They may be really just like this about being abused because they've been abused and come and did something. So just every little thing is don't abuse me, don't abuse me. You see, because they're focused on that's what they did wrong. They were too easy. They did everything. They were easy to be the slave. They were easy to be taken advantage of, and they realized that wasn't good. That wasn't profitable for them. So they don't want to do that, or they realized that they were overbearing. They were fast. They kicked everybody around. They were bullies, and they may come into it very shy. They don't want to go out and control anything because they've got this mindset. Control is bad. I don't want to control. I want to get over that. I don't want to have to push people around. So they go out of their way. They let other people push them around because they don't want to do that. And you think, well, why are they like that? Why are they so timid? Well, sometimes it's just because they've got this mindset that they're not going to make that same mistake again. And they have a much higher probability of learning and growing if they come in that way than if they just jump in and, they don't get that little instruction. So once you get a little more advanced to where that's useful to you, then it's very valuable to see that life and see what you did wrong and see what you did right and try to focus. It's like you program your dreams and you just think of this. I'm gonna wake up in my dream. I'm gonna wake up in my dream. If you program your dream, you actually will tend to do it. It's the same. I'm not going to get angry. I'm not going to be abused. Whatever. And if you focus on it enough, you'll come in with that intent. It'll be kind of strong. You won't know where it comes from, but you'll just feel that way. It'll be a big thing in your life. And that's because you come in kind of programmed to do it better next time.
Like child prodigies, the 7-year-old who's playing Bach perfectly and with hardly a piano lesson, or the 7-year-old that's singing opera.
Those are again multiple reasons. It could be that they were so completely attached. See, what you let go of depends a lot on how much you're attached to something. And some of those cases that Ephraim here was talking about that are hard cases are people who are very attached to things. People who were attached to a place or attached to a person or attached to a fear or something, and they get so attached to it that it's hard for them to let go. It's like a dream. You have a nightmare and it's hard to forget about it. You wake up and you go you go to the bathroom or something and you come back and man, you're right back in it. You can't let it go. For people who are very attached to things, sometimes they will just carry that on. They don't let it go. It's so big in their experience that it follows. And maybe if you were you know, into music to that extent that it's just your whole life, that you might carry that then to the next one. So that's one reason. Another reason, so that is like a carryover. You don't forget as much because you have so much energy in it. Secondly, it could be that if you're a prodigy, you're there you're that way because those around you need to learn to deal with that, or because the last time you were here, you were poor, dumb, wet, and cold, you know, and it just didn't work out. And what you did is you complained. You said, well, look, give me a break. You know, I want to be smart. I want to be born wealthy. I want to be this and that, because that'd make all the difference. The whole reason that I didn't do well is because, you know, this situation. So I say, okay, you know, there you are. You're born rich. You're born smart. You're born playing the piano. You know, you're born athletic. And then, of course, if you mess it up again, next time they say, well, remember last time you said this didn't help? You know, so it's that sort of thing. So sometimes you're born with some sort of gift or other kind of thing, and maybe it's just because you asked for it and you thought that that would be a solution. Mostly it's not, and you learn that. So your whole point there is maybe just to learn that that didn't help. That wasn't a solution. Being born rich didn't actually solve your problems. So you get different kinds of things. People win for different reasons.
Well, there's a lot of discussion on the board about that people that were born into very humble circumstances were more lower entropy beings, and people that were born into easier circumstances were higher entropy beings. But that's really not
necessarily
there's no
true.
correlation necessarily.
Not a lot of correlation there. You know, it just depends what you're ready for and what experience is most likely. It's all probabilistic. If this experience has a high probability of helping you, whether that means to show you that your attitude's wrong or whatever the help is, then you will do that. And if you don't care, you just kind of get it random. You know, you just go and you get whatever you get. So no, I don't think there's a lot of correlation that way. You know, for sometimes people will say, well, what about the poor starving kids in Biafra? You know, what's that all about? You know, they only live to be like 12 years old, and then most of them die of disease or starvation. Why would anybody want to do that? Well, there's a couple of reasons why somebody would want to do that. One, it's not about being happy and comfortable. To those starving children in Biafra, what kind of life did they have as far as love and caring and connection with other people? Are they in a community where there's a lot of love, you know, the parents or the other kids, or are they in a miserable place? Well, just because they're physically miserable doesn't necessarily mean that they're poverty-stricken as far as their relationships go. They may be very much attached to family or other things, you know. So for one, you may be thinking about the wrong thing. Secondly, you get an entity that doesn't, maybe they're kind of new here and they want just to get their feet wet. They want to go in for a short time and come back out because they really don't know how to act or what to do. You can get in a situation that's very scripted. Look, here's what it's going to be like. You know, we're going to start, they don't have a lot of choices. It's just like this. Well, that's a get your feet wet choice. If you have to think that being comfortable and having a good time is not what it's about. It's about learning. And the fact that you're here, that you're miserable, the way you view that on the other side isn't like that's a horrible thing. Just like if your character in your video game has got to run through the cavern of death or something, you know, you don't shudder, you know, before they do it. You say, all right, it's something I have to get through, you know, so that you run them through it, and maybe they die, and you run through it again until you get the maze down. But it's not seen as that. It's like, oh, that's awful, you know, children starving. I don't want to be one of those. You think of it in other terms. Well, what could I grow from there? Well, there's a lot of love maybe in those situations. Maybe people help each other out. There may be a lot of positive stuff going on there, and it's a very controlled, not too many decisions. You just kind of get in and go with the flow. You're only in for 10 or 12 years, and you're out again, and get to do something that could be attractive, you see, to certain entities. So we can't look at it with our prejudices. We have to look at it from an evolutionary standpoint, why somebody might choose to do that. Besides, if what you need to learn most is humility, it might be good to be born poor. Or if what you need to learn is, you know, to come out and be a little more in charge and not always be a shrinking violet, you might need to be born in a situation where you have to make decisions and you know, take care of others. There's lots of reasons.
Well, you see a lot of people born poor, and then they still make a great life for themselves.
Right.
A lot of people that are born rich and they die as a drug overdose, you know, 'cause so it doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily mean
No.
guarantee you anything.
No, doesn't mean a thing. So I think there's very little correlation. I think it's individual again. You get an assignment that's good for you.
I'm always cracking up over my friends who are like, this is it, my last incarnation, I just never want to do this again. I learned all I need to learn.
Yeah.
I'm dying with Mother Earth. I have a friend that said that. Mother Earth is dying and I'm dying with her. And I'm like, okay, there's no,
Yeah.
you know, there's no talking to that, but.
Yeah, well, you get a lot of that. One of the things I get, usually from young men, is when I give a presentation, I'll have some young men come up to me and they'll say something like, well, you know, I don't have any fears. I don't have any beliefs. Why, you know, why aren't I, you know, why can't I go out of body and do all these things? I don't have any fear or any beliefs at all. And it's like, you don't know, you know, the fears and the beliefs that you have. You're just unaware of them. Doesn't mean you don't have any, but they don't believe that. You know, they think they have, there's none that they're aware of. They don't feel they have any. So, yeah, there's lots of perfect people walking around.
I wanted to ask you about something I read in, I think the middle volume of your book, and it was to the effect that the next 50 years in our history is going to be particularly important, something to that effect, but I remember it very clearly. Do you recall?
No, not exactly. It is very important. I mean, every time it's very important, but we tend to be right now on the evolution, the things that are happening. We're kind of on a knife's edge, if you like. All kinds of things promise great, fast change. And the problem is, will we be able to handle that change wisely or not? You know, we've come to a point where our technology is challenging our quality. See, so we have all this technology, so we can destroy the world 3 or 4 times over. You know, we have with pollution, you know, with war, with germs, with all kinds of things. So our technology's gotten to the point where we are potentially excessively destructive. We could be. We have the potential for that. Well, that's never been that way before. Before, even if you get a whole bunch of, you know, renegade, wild people, all they can do is tear up the neighborhood, you know, which is maybe a square mile or two. Now we can tear up the whole damn planet all at once, you see. So our technology's gotten to the point that we have to be grown up enough to deal with it. You know, we're on the edge of being able to have designer people, you know, where we will clone and design and fiddle with the embryos and things. So we have people just the way we like them, make them smarter, stronger, whatever we want to do with them. We've got a lot of things, like we've got designer drugs now that'll help you learn faster, that'll help you do this, that'll blast you out of body. You know, we got all sorts of things. So here, right now, we've got this technology that's giving us tremendous reach and power. And things like the internet. We can communicate with everybody all over the world, you know, unprecedented. We got so many unprecedented things all happening at once. Do we have the wisdom to deal with all of that? You see, that's what makes kind of the knife edge that we're balanced on. It's getting to where, you know, the system's gone critical, if you say. You might say it that way. Before, nobody really had the ability to affect much. Even the biggest tyrant was local. Not true anymore. You know, we can have world tyrants now instead of just tribal tyrants. We have the technology to do so much. We can control people with that technology. We can manage them. We can feed them propaganda to get them to believe whatever we want them to believe. We have ways to do things that were not dreamed of before. When a guy got up on a stump before and told a lot of lies trying to convince people to vote for him, it was only the people that could hear his voice. You walked 50 feet away, you couldn't even hear what he was saying. Well, now we can talk to the world. We can manipulate the world. But we can also have the ability to do nice things to the world, to help the world as well. All this technology gives us advantages. So here we are with a lot of power, and how much wisdom, how much quality, how much whatever to use that power. So it's like, you've left, finally in the daycare, they've evolved dynamite and guns, right? They figured out how to build guns in daycare. Is that a problem?
Yeah.
You know, maybe. So that's why I say that the next 50 years or so are going to be exciting times. Because here we are in daycare, and somebody's introduced dynamite and guns into the daycare, and what's gonna happen? What are they gonna do with them?
And if we blow up the daycare, then what happens? Do we have to go to another
New
VR,
daycare.
or will they do a reset, or what?
No, it probably will just, everything will just limp by. It'll keep right on going, they're not gonna blow up everybody in the daycare, and if they do, then eventually, we'll see how the computer evolves out the probabilities, and it'll start again. Or somebody could put the reset button and say, let's start this one over back at this other part, give them another shot at it. It's hard to say. Digital things are wonderful in the sense that, you never lose anything. You can always start over at any point you want. But so here we are, evolved to this point where systems are going critical. Now, everybody has thought that we always lived in exciting times. Right? You go 200 years and everybody felt, wow, the French Revolution, everything's changing. But still, their ability to affect things was very small compared to their ability to affect things now. And that's what makes it dicey. So that's why it's so important that we kind of raise the quality of consciousness as soon as possible. That's why it's very important to do this. It's why it's very important to make this ideas, available to people, because we need some wisdom now more than we probably ever had in the whole evolution of people. If not, we can set ourselves all back in the sense that, it'll be a tougher, meaner place again, and you'll be spending most of your time on survival and very little of your time, meditating and doing things like that. So it becomes a less efficient school if we go backwards. Suddenly, we're back into survival mode. Betty, do you want to lead the proceedings?
No.
All right. That's a straightforward, honest answer. Okay. Maureen, would you like to say?
Thank you for anyone that could give any kind of help whatsoever. It'd be more than appreciative.
What's her ailment?
What's our
Pardon me?
focus?
Yeah, what am I working on?
Do you want to share your ailment?
Sure. I have just recovered from breast cancer, and they're telling me they have to watch it closely because if it comes back as inoperable. They just found 2 masses in my thyroid gland, the right side. They found I have 4 or 5, I've lost count. Stenosis in my neck, so I've been in such pain. I just had epidurals this last Tuesday. I didn't think I'd make it here because I couldn't manage with the pain. It was really that bad. It felt like someone was knives in my wrists. That's from up here, coming down the arms. And then they found that I have a tear in my right muscle. This is all through MRIs, bursitis. And I have bone spurs in my arm and my neck. Maybe I've been a little stressed.
Sounds like it, maybe just a tad. Okay.
Can you say that?
Well, I've been clearly diagnosed for 20 years maybe with ankylosing spondylitis, which is where you get bone spurs all up and down your spine, particularly my lower spine. And as you've seen me kind of hobbling around when I get up here, my hip joints are starting to give me a lot more trouble. I don't walk too far, don't walk too fast. Right now I'm getting a lot of pain in my neck, which is more bone spurs.
Not being able to get up if you need to mobility.
Yeah, I do have mobility problems. I'm stiff. I can't turn my head more than that, up or to the side or down. I'm at the pain limit. I don't know whether it would actually move if somebody forced it. Eventually, they say if you're not lucky, or well, no, if you are lucky, when your spine locks up completely, you can still walk, if it goes that far. And I feel I'll be lucky if I don't end up in diapers, because my nerves going down from the end of my spine are getting pinched. I get all sorts of problems in my legs, which interfere with walking too. And
Skin issues on feet.
well, I don't know what caused that, and the doctors have never explained it to me, but I lost a lot of weight by dieting, or I guess, just changing the way I ate and the amount and so forth. And then I went on a survey to look at a vote for the company I was working for. And on the flight back, I just had all sorts of pains all through my body. My teeth hurt, my sinuses hurt, just all over. And then suddenly I started retaining fluid, and like, the doctors have never explained it to me, but I picked up like 100 pounds or more of weight in like 2 or 3 months, all fluid, because I was still eating the same as I had been. It's just retained fluid. And fortunately, I got on Medicare and was able to go to doctors and so forth and start getting some medications. I take a lot of diuretics. I don't take much heart medicine anymore, but I do take medicine for my blood pressure.
But to make you have most of the skin index.
Yeah, because of all that retained fluid, I started collecting fluid down in my legs and ankles, and then just would balloon, make like big blisters, except palm-sized, and break, and got infected and got me into the hospital and caused a lot of trouble.
And the feet are still affected.
Yeah, well, that's probably related to diabetes.
It's a focus though, to the right, it's a focus.
Yeah, well.
Okay.
My biggest problem with my feet is that I can't reach them anymore.
But that would be, the focuses would be then the spondylitis, in the feet, your skin issues.
Well, I've had heart block, and where it stands right now, I don't know. It's a lot better because I started taking vitamin C, because I found out that exactly as the doctor described it is not real common, but men with ankylosing spondylitis get this heart block condition. And that's what the doctor described. And I got this bright idea that that I understood that there was anti-inflammatory value effects in vitamin C. And I'd always taken like a gram a day, and I started taking up to 10 times that, and my heart block got better. And that's not my limitation so much now as being physically able to walk. But now I'm getting indigestion trouble all the time because of the acidity of the vitamin C, so I'm having to cut that back, which hopefully won't affect my heart, but it is letting the arthritic pains that also goes with ankylosing spondylitis. It goes in the joints and where tendons attach. So I'm fairly uncomfortable after the past couple of nights particularly.
So that's the focus.
Okay, well, those of you who wish, let's take 10 minutes or so and see if we can't help these two people. Anybody else want to join the list while we're here? We don't want to exclude anyone. We don't have any other particular health issues they'd like to ask for help for?
Arthur, my son, Arthur for his seizures.
Yeah, Betty's son is autistic and having some problems recently. Okay, then let's do that. Do it in your own way. And we'll keep track of time and let you know when 10 minutes is up. Okay, and now during the rest of the day and tomorrow and the next day and for the next week or so, if you would revisit this, just give it a little push, a little push, a little push. Just keep revisiting it and brighten that light up a little bit, or whatever it is, the tools that you use to do it. Don't just let it go. If it's just this 15 minutes, it's about what it was. If you just let that go and don't visit it again, it won't be nearly as effective if you keep after it for the next couple of weeks.
You could program that in?
Yeah, you can program that in. So keep your intent active for a couple of weeks, and it'll make a bigger difference.
Can we request feedback on the boards to hear if there's been any?
Sure. Yeah, let us know. Yeah, let us know. All right, it's kind of mood's changed a little bit. Okay.
I find it useful, other people might too, to build what you want to do up as a thought form, you know, construct it during your meditation in your head until you can, you know, see it as a concrete thing, what you want to do. Then once it's built in your head, you can pull it up just like that to revisit it.
Right.
I mean, once you've made it real to yourself, it's just, I can pull things up real quick after. The building process might take a little bit because you gotta kind of follow it comes to you how to do it. But once you have it, then it's easy to bring back up,
So it's like a
to add to
subfolder.
it, like you're saying.
It's like a subfolder in your folder?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Kind
that's right.
of. It might be helpful to people.
Yeah, I agree. I have the same experience.
That was good.
So, what's next? Anybody have their hand in the air? We have, surely we haven't asked everybody's question. Donna has a question. What's that, Donna?
I don't know if I should have a question, but you talked about other PMRs.
Mm-hmm.
And you've said, of course, you don't tell stories about them, but there are other PMRs with other learning situations, different relationship type situations, different physical rule sets. Could you say, in a general way, is our PMR one of the more effective learning places as far as feedback, or are there ones that are more advanced?
Well, advanced is a hard thing to address. Others are just different, and ours is changing. You know, we just talked about how over the next 50 years we may undergo some really dramatic changes here. Well, if that's the case, then this PMR is going to be different than it was 100 years ago. So they change, and they're different. I've been in some PMRs that seem very similar to me, like somewhere you'd expect in Spain or maybe the Southwest, 75, 80, 100 years ago. You know, that's kind of the feel they had for them, with them. I've been in some that were very violent. They had already gotten to that point where the idea of grab whatever you can grab and hold on to had basically taken over.
They got to that point, or they started at that point, we're gonna evolve out of that. Was that an end result?
No, that was an end result. They'd been better places before that, but it basically devolved into that.
So they're self-destructing?
Yeah, self-destructing in that sense. It was a very mean-spirited, unpleasant, violent place to be. That's the way it had evolved to. It's not that was just beginning out that way, but that's what they ended up with. And now it continues with the idea that maybe they will grow out of it. Otherwise, it just stays that way.
So they're not going to be, I mean, dissolved completely? They're still?
No, they're still there. At least they were last time I visited. They were still there, just being however they were. It wasn't deleted or gone or whatever, but it basically was an extremely unpleasant,
Do they notice you?
violent place. Well, yes and no. Mostly I've been there several times, and sometimes I go there and do not take on a body that they do not notice me. I just observe.
Mm-hmm.
Other times I have taken on a body and kind of been among them. But
I mean, is it like, are you shiny? I mean, to me,
No.
can you tell a difference?
no, most of them don't notice any difference. They
Do you have
don't.
to act like them to fit in? Do you have to
Yes.
become violent?
No, you just have to keep a low profile. Stay out of the way. You know, don't get involved, and you know, be very careful. That sort of thing. You just kind of stay out of the way. Now, you don't have to act like them. Eventually, if you stay there long enough, you'd probably be picked out as being different, and you'd probably be in for trouble because being different there isn't a good thing. But,
Wouldn't that be
you
a
don't
good
stay
experiment
there
to
that
end?
long.
Wouldn't that be a good
It
experiment?
might be,
for
you know, if
anyone to
it got to the point that they didn't think that there was, let's say, the probability that it could turn itself around, get close to zero, it might be a good one to end. If there's still some finite probability that it could turn the other way, that eventually they could get sick and tired of that, and there may be a revolution, if you will, of a little bit of peace and kindness someplace that could grow. As long as that probability is there, then my guess is they'll keep perking on. If that's, but it was dominantly that way. See, we're just the opposite. We're dominantly, most people are pretty nice people, and they're trying to do all right. And we've got some violent and nasty types, but they're a minority. If it flips the other way around, it gets difficult. So I've been places like that. So they're all different, and they, I don't know, there's some places that where they've gone quite a bit further than us, and that it is mostly kind of peace and light and people getting along and that sort of thing. So they're just different. I mean, all these things they're just evolving. They go where they go, and they're not all the same. And who knows whether they'll all eventually end up the same place? You know, if they all keep going. But it's for all of them, it's an open system. None of them it's a closed system. So
Can I
it's
ask you a
just,
question, Tom?
yeah.
From your book, you say that these other physical matter realities are not in our system, yet
Right.
they have no physical matter reality in. My question is, do they have separate universes, or?
Yeah, it's not necessarily the same universe. It's not that we're talking about another planet in this universe. It's basically just different reality systems altogether. Some of them, we have several other reality systems that are in N division, but other ones are not. You know, it's not the only division. So
is our universe fractal? I mean.
So, universe fractal? Yeah, sure, everything's fractal. Yeah, it's all, that's why the fractal patterns are so good at describing our universe. You know, you can look at fractal patterns and you can see lakes and rivers and streams and trees and stars and whatever you look at. You know, fractals are very good, and that's because we are like a 3D fractal. It's a limited system. If you're at the larger reality isn't limited to 3D. It's just a fractal, you know, evolutionary consciousness system. So when you take that system and turn it into a 3D reality, it's not surprising that, you know, 3D fractals produce things that look like, you know, our natural environment. But yeah, it's just different. I mean, a lot of places are evolving, and I'd hate to say that, you know, we're advanced or we're slow, or, you know, it's not like that. We're just different. We just are how we are, and how we're going to be 50 years from now may be totally different. You know, it's hard to say what happens and what comes, and where there's a lot of violence amongst the sentient beings, there also tends to be more violence among the natural things. Like, you know, you tend to have more natural disasters. You have that kind of stuff because it kind of picks up that negative vibe, kind of is self-destructive, tends to be a destructive mindset. So it's not only unpleasant from the sentient beings there, but it's just unpleasant all in all. The whole thing is degenerated. So that's kind of the worst place that I've been, but there's some sweet places too.
Could you say that these 50 years that's already started, because maybe it's like 1980s, it's not necessarily 50, maybe 60, maybe 100, but don't you think that these changes that you talk about, they already started and they're accelerating now?
Oh, sure. You mean the changes that we're undergoing?
Yeah.
Sure, they're accelerating now, and partly it's our technology that's driving them, so we said before, because our technology is accelerating. You know, we've had more discoveries. You know, if you think about the first, kind of when science first became science, which is maybe, you know, if we go all the way back to Greeks, you know, Aristotle, it's kind of the beginning of science. But from Aristotle to now is like a blink of an eye compared to the beginning of our, you know, of our physical modern reality to now, or even the beginning of when we have historical records, fossils and that kind of stuff. Talking about, millions and millions and millions of years ago, this planet was still, evolving, and now since technology became such a thing, it's just been in the last blink of our evolution. So it picks up the pace, but then if you look at technology itself, you realize that there's more impact from the discoveries in the last 5 years than there was for the last 100 years before that, all added together. So it keeps getting more and more intense. That's why I say it's kind of building to a critical thing, that whether or not we have the wisdom and the quality to deal with the tools that we're building. So yeah, our reality is going to be going through some changes, I predict, in the near future, and it doesn't have anything to do with 2012. It has to do with us and the reality that we're creating, and whether or not we can make good choices.
You mentioned on the forum previously about sometimes, historically there have been like loopholes or cracks in our system that people have exploited and then they get patched up. Can you give an example or talk a little bit about that?
Tell me more.
I guess in our rule set, people have been able to kind of do things that really they shouldn't have been allowed to do, and it got patched up later so that people can't repeat that. Does that ring a bell at all?
Well, yeah, there have been some evolution, say in the policy. Whenever you have a large complex systems that are evolving need some, you have them and you can just leave them alone. But if you want it to evolve in a particular way and you want this to be a good learning lab, you tend to fiddle with it a little and you give it some structure. And the interaction between physical and non-physical has its limitations. There's like law, that says things that can happen. So it's not allowed for, let's say, entities from the non-physical to come here and harass us, do things, to us and that sort of thing. It's just, we're left, we're kind of protected here. So there's some rules like that. And why? Because you wouldn't want, that to be, that's not an effective part of this being a good learning lab. It's just like if you had a nice schoolhouse and had all little children in there, you wouldn't allow, a bunch of teenagers to come running through the halls, tossing, firecrackers into the classrooms. You just wouldn't allow that. You'd stop it. You'd say, no, it's against policy. We can't do that. So there are policies and things. So there is some administration, some rules that have been put into place in order to make this an effective place. And those rules have evolved. There's not the same rules now that they've always been. And the policy tends to change as those enforcing the policy change. So yeah, it's not always been consistent. There were times here when things were different. Policies have just changed, even not all that long ago again. But when I say change, I mean dramatic changes, they get tweaked a little bit. It's mostly tweaks for them. But we make up our own reality and we're changing it. We're changing the rules as well. So that's kind of a waffly answer, but I don't want to go too far there.
Some of the beings in the PMR universes are humanoid and some are not. Some are very different, as you said. What would some of the challenges, without descriptions or anything, what would some of the challenges be for them? They're all working towards the same thing that we are. They're learning. How is their learning different?
It's not all that different. The circumstances are just different. If you change the sets on a stage, but the play is all about the same thing. So this one takes place in the desert, this one takes place in the trees, this one takes place, with little conical people that wobble around, and this one takes place with humanoids, and it's all different, but it's the same sort of thing. You have the good versus evil sort of play that goes on everywhere, where there's you have to make choices. You have free will. The choices lead you toward love or away from it. You have those negative forces that have evolved toward the negative. You have the positive. So you have this. That's all about that's what the evolution's all about. So those same kinds of dramas are playing out almost everywhere in all of these frames, because they all have the same basic function, and that is to be, virtual reality evolution trainers. So they all kind of work the same. It's just they've all gone in different directions. They've all evolved in their own way.
It's really the social interaction as individuated entities that brings about the lowering in entropy.
Right.
It doesn't matter what the social structures, a bunch of squids, swimming around in some ocean, or, like you said, desert toad society or something that can manipulate their environment. It's still about the social interaction between the individuated entities.
Mm-hmm.
As individuated entities with that illusion of separation between them that brings about the change.
Sure.
Are they always focused towards growing towards love, though? Are any of them intended to devolve? I questioned that wrong. Is the one commonality they're all focused?
Yeah, the one commonality is all these virtual realities are all created for the same purpose, and that's to be evolutionary trainers. So the point there is to grow toward love, and it's more or less successful, in different places. They've evolved differently. But then you see we're changing too. Everything changes. So.
How often do other beings take a human form here? Is there a percentage? How often? Can you pick one out? Is it?
Generally, no. Maybe you could if you tried, but there's really no point. It's not that hard just to observe. Sometimes you get the idea that you're just kind of being watched. Well, you probably are. Other beings are interested in what we do and how we do it and what's going on, and particularly if you're doing something that has a potential to make a difference, it's more attracting attention. I can remember when we first started the seminars when at Whistlefield, probably the first 2 or 3 seminars that we gave with Bob Monroe, and we laid out at that time, we had this wiring harness with a lot of earphones attached to it. We'd play a program on a cassette tape. That's something out of a museum now. And we'd play it into this harness, and it would go down, maybe there was 10 or 15 earphones peeled off out of this big trunk line, and it would lay down on the floor. We'd run a motel. We'd get a big room like this, and we'd lay this harness around, and everybody would come, and they'd bring air mattresses or something to lie on, and everyone would lie down and put on a headset, and we played a program, and that's the way it was done. That was before there was a Monroe Institute. It was before there were check units and places to get into. There was people lying on the floor in motel rooms. And it always would kind of upset or I shouldn't say upset, but get a lot of questioning looks when you'd go to a motel and you'd say, well, there's a conference room is what you have. And you said, well, take all the tables and chairs out of here. We're going to have 40 people in here, and we want to get rid of all the tables and chairs. And what's going to happen in there? And we want it to be quiet, and don't interrupt us, and don't open the door. So, but that's the way it was. And they'd all lie down kind of head to head, as it would go around because the wires weren't so long. And anyway, it was very apparent to me and Dennis and Nancy Lee and the rest of us who were doing this that there were just lots of entities kind of crowded around this. A lot of interest. There'd be 20, 30, 40. You could notice entities that would just be hanging around looking at what was going on. Because in their mind, this was a start of something important, something big, something different that was going to make a difference. So because of that, because they were aware of the probabilities of where this might go and whatever, it attracted a lot of attention. And there's just all these entities just hanging out, listening, seeing what was going on, and sightseers, basically. They just were hanging out, observing. They didn't get in the way, they didn't bother anybody. They weren't harmful. They weren't this or that. They were just curious.
Nobody's interested in us today?
Oh, no, there are people that are interested in us today. Yeah. So, yes, you do have, attraction to other forms that are out there. So why is this? Well, out of the larger consciousness bubbles all kinds of things. Like I say, some of them live in the NPR and don't come here, and others have been here, and whoever, who knows exactly what it's all about. Some of them are probably people who have bodies here that are doing this you know, on the side. They're not aware of it, you know, but it's an attractive, it's a kind of an attractive thing. You stick up above the norm when you have a lot of, like we're sitting all around here doing that healing. That created a, you know, from an energetic look from outside this reality frame, that created a big, you know, a big show, you know, a lot of light, a lot of energy was being moved and directed in a very specific way, and that attracts attention. Yeah, so you get that sort of thing.
So do you think they can learn something from us?
Or they're just
Maybe.
watching to see if we're gonna learn something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're just, yeah, both.
Yeah, both.
Both, just curiosity.
Are
Yeah.
they keeping notes?
Yeah. You know, curious.
Helpful.
Yes, Linda?
I wanted to talk about the board a little bit, since we're all from the board, you know, the discussion
Mhm.
forum. I miss your presence on the board. You don't post anywhere near as often as you used
No,
to.
I don't. Well, that's good news and bad news. Let me comment on that. You know, why is that? A couple of reasons. One, my idea for the board wasn't that it was be a place, that it wouldn't be a podium for me to stand up and talk. That would not be good. That's not really what I wanted. I mean, I could do that, but it wasn't about me. I wanted it to be a place where people could come and interact with each other, where they could come and be helpful to each other and share their ideas and share their concepts. And this is what happened to me. And, oh yeah, well that's something like that happened to me too. And that's what I wanted it to be. Because otherwise it would become dependent on me. You know, it's like, come to the board and talk to the wizard. You know, I didn't want that. That wasn't it. I wanted a place that would be useful, that people could come, because you know, when you have these experiences, often you don't know whether you're nuts, you know, are you imagining this? Did anybody else ever feel that way? Is, you know, what does it mean? And all you really need is a place to talk to other people who are experiencing the same kind of things, or have already been there and experienced what you're experiencing. That's the kind of place I wanted. So one, I need to spend a lot of time there in the beginning to get it going. But I don't want to overstay my welcome, because if I stay there too much, I become the center of it, and it's all talk to Tom, and Tom has to answer, and everything else, you know, it tends to evolve around me. I didn't want it to evolve around me. I wanted it to evolve around all of you.
But you were more active before.
I was more active before because I needed to get it started. When I got a critical mass of a lot of people who really were very wise and very smart and knew what they were doing, had an experience, once you kind of got that central core, which is most of you, you know, the people that are there that post a lot, you get this core of people who really understand what's going on. They have some experience. And I've worked with them some for a long time. Big fella back there with the hat on is Moji Doji. Moji Doji was one of the earlier, when Moji got to the forum, there probably wasn't but 10 people posted there in any given month. And there wasn't a whole lot going on. And it took a while before it actually collected a group like this that could really help each other. And that was my concept for it. I didn't want it to be about me. I wanted it to be about you guys. So one, it needed me to withdraw at a point once I got the critical mass going. I needed to kind of get out of the spotlight and let you guys go with it. And that's part of the plan. The other part is that I'm just up to here with things to do. The more visibility I get, the more email I get, the more questions I get. The forum is a place where you guys can help each other. There's already a support system there. There's a lot of other places, like the stuff, the questions I get from the YouTube. These people are out there by themselves. They don't, unless, and I tell them, go to the forum, go to the forum, ask somebody there. And a lot of them will, go to the forum. But they're kind of lost out there on their own. So I tend to spend more attention there than I do now on the forum, because the forum is self-perpetuating. There's a lot of good people there, and I notice that. As I read, I don't post much, but I do read, every day I go into the forum and I read, and I'm really impressed. You'll see these posts and somebody will explain, or somebody will ask questions, and the questions are really good, and the explanations are really good. Like, I couldn't have said it any better than that. And I'm really impressed with the forum. It's turned out to a bunch of very bright, knowledgeable, caring people, and that's wonderful. I don't know that there's anything like it anywhere on the internet. That there's a place quite like it. I mean, you can go and discuss almost anything on the internet, but we've collected a lot of really terrific people that come in and have very significant things to say. So I think that's wonderful, and I just hope it keeps, I hope it keeps growing and staying that way, because that was the point of it. I didn't want me to become the center of it and then necessary to it. It needed to become independent of me. So I am really busy, and my schedule basically is I get up around 7:30. I go to bed around 1:30 in the morning, and I work all the time in between. So I'm just really busy. And on top of that, I've had all this construction and everything else going on, so that's then taken time away from everything. Nobody's gotten the attention that they deserve. But I just can't do it all. So I do what I can do, and I try to focus it where I think it makes the most good. And right now, the forum is a smart place. You don't need a lot of help. I don't know if you guys know it, but you got some really wise and helpful and caring people there. And I read things, and I'm impressed with you all. I'm very impressed with you. I think you do a marvelous job. Marvelous job.
There's something very meaningful, though, about getting the answer from the wizard.
Unfortunately, yes, but hopefully you will get weaned away from that dependency.
Yeah. But even when you just chime in and say, I agree 100% with what so-and-so said, that sort of gives more credence to what those of us that are giving advice are saying when you sort of swoop in and either say yay or nay.
You guys can just email me and pretend I'm Tom. Answer, and you can pretend I'm right.
Imagine that.
Virtual Tom.
Can we all thank Ted for the work made?
I don't know that it could have happened without Ted. Ted was also very early. Moji Doji was one of the early birds that got there. Probably I think I published the books in like 2002 or 2003 in February, and by 2004, Moji was on the board and Ted was on the board. And at first, Ted wasn't a very active player, but he got more active, and I asked him to please help. I couldn't keep up, and he's done a marvelous job pulling it all together, and it's a tough job to keep up with. I kept up with it for a while, for a few years. I answered every post. I answered every one of them, and I wanted to do that forever, but I just couldn't. And then I knew that it really wasn't in the best interest of the forum if I took too central a role. But yeah.
See, that's what I saw. I saw this author who was personally responding to every single question. I was like, oh my God, I've never seen this before. And then as soon as I joined on and dropped
Someone said the other day, or must have been yesterday, that the board is probably just at the beginning of what it's going to end up being.
Wow.
Also remember, when he answered every single post, he also wasn't getting as many posts.
Right.
Yeah, it was only 10 or 15 people, 20 people, then 30 people, and now we get 20 or 30 posts, in a day sometimes. Used to be...
That was a month.
Yeah.
That was a month a few years ago.
Yeah, a few years ago, that took a month to do that much. It was a lot easier to keep up with, and also I wasn't getting, 50 emails every day, other questions. I was getting a few, so the whole thing, as I get more and more visibility, the workload grows and grows with it. And the forum is one part that I wanted to be able to go on its own, to run itself.
There's some redundancy in the questions because there's so many threads now. I find that new people join all the time and ask questions that have been answered over
So many layers.
Yeah, well, that's true because people don't see it. And
right.
One of the big challenges here, and Ted and I have talked about this a lot. One of the big challenges here is to organize the information in such a way that it's not finding a needle in a haystack. Somebody comes in, and a lot of times they'll have a very specific question about something, and they kind of look around, and it seems like there's a lot of stuff here, but how are they going to find, what they want? It's like you need an index so you can look up, all the things that were about food or all the things that were about higher self or that kind of thing. It's very hard to do in a live thing that's going like that. It would take more than Ted almost gives it full time. He has other things going on in his life besides that, but he gives it almost full time. And that's it's a really big job. It takes a lot of hours he's donated. And, the only pay he ever gets is my undying gratitude, that he's doing it. That's all the pay. He doesn't get anything else. So how many people would it take, to build an index and keep it current? Well, I don't know, but it's a lot. It's a lot of work. One of the ideas I had is that this is going to be a resource where people could come, and it's like a reference work. They could come, and if they wanted to know about whatever, out-of-body experience, or how does out-of-body and lucid dreaming, connect? They have some questions. They can find it. And the trouble, of course, is indexing it so that they can find that kind of stuff. The other trouble is that it's also, like any forum, it's a social place too. So it's not just, I kind of had this idea it would just all be, just the facts, man, just the facts. Don't post anything unless it's something you want to publish. This is just publishable material. But of course, that doesn't really work because these are, your people. And, you're social, and you're going to say, hi, how are you? I just went out to visit my mother. And there's going to have that stuff in there. But as that stuff grows, then somebody coming into it, the haystack's even bigger. Because now they have to sort through all sorts of stuff. Some chit-chat, some really dynamic stuff, and some just stuff that was, that's there that doesn't have a lot of meaning to it. That's just the way it is. But that's the
But
way.
you never know what's going to have meaning. It could be a little bit of a chit
Yeah.
chat that someone reads and says, whoa.
You never know what leads to what. But it's very difficult to take all that and put it into a reference. And that would be nice. We could have a forum, and Ted's tried to do this. Ted and I have talked about it. He's tried to do it. Those links that you have down at the bottom of the main page, that's what they were there to do. They were to collect all the stuff, all the gems, if you had to pull all that stuff and put it somewhere and categorize it so that people could find it. But
Start
it's just,
recognizing the pattern of the question.
but it's too big a thing for one person to do. Ted's tried it, and he's put a lot of stuff down there, and he's often said, come on, you guys, if you find something that particularly interests you, put it down there. But, most everybody's busy, and they jump in there while they're at work. They go in for 15 minutes and look at it, and then they're out. It's hard to find somebody like Ted who's going to sit down and basically dedicate, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 hours a day to doing that kind of stuff. It's not going to happen. So, but that's, those are kind of some of my ideas in starting the forum, that it would be self-generating, that it would take care of itself, that it would be a reference so that people could come, and here would be a database of this kind of really interesting information where they could tap in and find it. Well, it's not exactly like that, but I think it's more like that than any place else. I don't know there's anywhere on the internet that people who having these kind of spiritual and these kind of personal growth questions can come and get straight talk from people.
At this point, the questions that are coming in seem to, after a while, you're going to be able to recognize a pattern. And I think I've only been there since 2008, and I've only read stuff from when I got there up. Unless it's been bumped. I haven't gone and tried to read everything. But I think now at this point, and that's like Ted will see that, or someone will see, this is the third person that's asked this question, and that's what motivates, this needs to be in that third section. So now there's been so much more people, more interaction, that the patterns of the questions are just now starting to become visible. To know, okay, this is a frequently asked question.
Yeah. Well, someday someone will come along and they'll look at that and they'll say, wow, there's a wealth of information here. This would make a good book, or maybe 2 or 3 books. If we could take all this information and, edit it and get it down into whatever, and somebody's going to get excited to do that, and they're going to do it. And my guess is that this will be a resource that'll have to be spun off by somebody else. I don't know who that somebody is, but I'm expecting that someday, somebody will drop out of the sky and they'll have that idea that that's what they want to do. They're going to go through this forum because there's so much really good stuff in there that they'll get it and, make books out of it, make a reference source out of it.
Consciousness,
Yeah, we're not. We're not there yet, but we're still building up the database.
You
I
could-
think eventually that will happen.
You could make a, I mean, right now there are Wikipedias out there for Pokemon and Battlestar Galactica, so yeah, you could have, like, let's say, you know, higher or larger consciousness system, and there could be like a very simple, straightforward wiki type, you know, reference thing, and below it could link up to forum links about it, like maybe it references like an Indra's Net post or something like that.
You got the job.
Don't volunteer that.
All right, Elliot.
I can't code. I can only code.
You can draw good.
I can draw and do language, but I can't do the hardcore stuff. I can probably find a way to do it.
Right, it's a good idea, you know,
Alright.
and that would be good.
Oh, yay.
So there's a lot of things coming. Our board is still evolving.
I like good stuff.
And I'm real impressed with how well it's doing, the quality of the conversation that takes place there.